We will call to order the special meeting of the Merrillville Town Council for today, Wednesday, December 20th at 4:30 p.m. Please stand for our Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Hardaway, would you lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Nicely done. Madam Clerk Treasurer Lewis, would you please call the roll?
Councilwoman Neal.
Here.
Councilman Richard Hardaway.
Here.
Councilman Jeff Minchuk.
Here.
Councilwoman Marge Uzelak. Councilman Sean Pettit.
Here.
Councilman Leonard White.
Here.
President Bella.
Here.
6 present, 1 absent.
Thank you. Moving on tonight to the purpose for this meeting. It's a special meeting to consider the food and beverage tax for the town of Merrillville. On May 4th of 2023, Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb signed a law called Public Law 236, referred to as the Act. This act introduced changes to certain sections of the Indiana Code, specifically Section 6-9, by adding a new chapter, Indiana Code 6-9-54.5. This change allowed the physical body of the town of Merrillville in Lake County, Indiana, referred to as the town, to impose a tax called the Town Food and Beverage Tax by or on or before, December 31st, 2023. According to the Act, the food and beverage tax applies to transactions involving the furnishing, preparation, or serving of food or beverages, 1, for consumption at a location or on equipment provided by the seller, 2, within the town, and 3, by a seller for a fee. Additionally, the tax also applies to transactions where food or beverages is, 1, served by a seller off of their premises, 2, sold in a heated state or heated by a seller, or 3, a combination of 2 or more food ingredients sold as a single item, or 4, sold with eating utensils provided by the seller. However, the food and beverage tax doesn't apply to transactions that are exempt from the state gross retail tax or to exempted items under Indiana Code Section 6-2.5. For example, packaged or bulk food groceries. The tax rate cannot exceed 1% of the seller's gross retail income from a qualifying food or beverage transaction, excluding the amount of tax imposed under Indiana Code Section 6-2.5. The collected tax is to be paid monthly by the state treasurer to the town clerk treasurer upon warrants issued by the state auditor. It has been established by a qualified accounting firm that the Merrillville food and beverage tax could generate $1.8 million in new revenue for the town of Merrillville each year. According to the Act, the funds collected through the food and beverage tax are to be used by the town for specific purposes. These include park and recreation purposes, such as land acquisition, tourism-related purposes, or to develop facilities, including land purchase, and the ability to pledge money for bonds, leases, or other obligations related to these purposes. Some of the ideas, for example, and not yet decided by the board, and which are posted on the town's website of how to spend funding generated from the tax, could include, but not limited to, revamp existing neighborhood parks with modern equipment and upgrades, build new neighborhood parks in areas where no park is available for residents, build a bandstand-type park for outdoor concerts and other shows that can be performed utilizing such a structure, expand the Dean and Barbara White Center, adding 2 basketball courts that would convert into 4 volleyball courts, so regional tournaments can be hosted here, expand programs at the community center, add sidewalks utilizing ideas presented by the comprehensive plan currently underway, which will connect our community for residents and tourism, add signalized crosswalks to provide safe pedestrian and bicycle passage throughout the town, to again connect our community, allowing access to commerce that should increase tourism. Add decorative street lighting and welcoming signage to entrance points in town. Identify and build a new town square type downtown area to give Merrillville an identity that was never accomplished upon becoming a town over 50 years ago. Build a splash pad and other water amenities for children to enjoy. Establish the recommendations that we expect to receive from resident feedback from the Merrillville Momentum Comprehensive Plan due for completion in early 2024. So how does it work? A 1% tax seems small. Here's what that means. A penny on every dollar spent. For every dollar someone spends on taxable items, they would contribute just 1 cent to the town through this tax. A dime on a $10 dinner tab, for example. If someone goes out for dinner and spends $10, the additional tax they would pay is equivalent to 10 cents. The concept behind this small tax is that even though everyone's contribution is minimal, when applied to a large number of consumers and transactions, it can accumulate to a significant amount for the town. This way, the town can generate additional revenue that might not be achievable through its existing sources of revenue. Today, the Merrillville Town Council is holding this special meeting and public hearing specifically focused on discussing the proposed ordinance to impose the food and beverage tax. This topic is the only item on the agenda. We will now open the public hearing portion of the meeting for this specific topic, the Merrillville food and beverage tax, which, if approved, would begin on January 1st, 2024. We are now open for public comments. Please state your name and address for the record. Please come up to the podium so we can record.
Hello, my name is Eric January. I live at 3031 West 58th Avenue, and I'm the treasurer-elect for the town of Merrillville. This very tax is one of the reasons I believe I got elected, because I told people that it was coming. And I'm concerned because having looked at some of the things that we're doing as a town, I believe that we may eventually be able to use the tax, but I believe that it's almost like giving a match to an arsonist. We have not done everything that we can as a town in order to make sure that our fiscal house is in order. For instance, the primary reason that we're asking for this money is that we made decisions that have caught up with us. The local area option income tax. We gave away 20% of that money, which has amounted to about $2 million since the enactment, that's going towards something that's not benefiting us. Railroad tracks out in Miller. That's not benefiting us. If we had that $2 million, we probably wouldn't be doing this. We've also voluntarily just decided to give the Boys and Girls Club $2 million to build their facility in the town of Merrillville. We can't afford that. The 10-year tax abatements. One of the things that initially alarmed me is that we're giving major corporations 10-year tax breaks and asking the taxpayers to carry the burden of the tax rate in the town of Merrillville. And I understand that if they were on the tax rolls, that would effectively reduce our tax rate individually, but we're giving 10-year tax abatements, and in addition to the 10-year tax abatements, through one of the funds, we gave some organization $300 and something thousand to pay for some equipment. So I believe the town is being operated as a charity, and I think that other than just right now making the decision, there's a new office, new elected officials coming in town on January the 1st. I don't know why we have to rush this right now, because I think that we need to have a full accounting about where the town is at fiscally. I understand that we're going to be losing some money with that grant that is going to be running out eventually, and the town can actually use the money. But before we actually get some more money, we need to actually start doing a better job with what we have. Right now, the community center is operating at a deficit, and largely it's because of how it's been run. We've been giving it away. The Boys and Girls Club hasn't been carrying their weight there. They haven't been paying rent. The Pop Warner team hasn't been paying its fair share. Volleyball teams that have operated out of there were basically operating at the expense of taxpayers. We have to cut all of that stuff out so that the town isn't faced with a deficit. And in terms of needing additional volleyball courts, we don't need that. We may need a swimming pool. We can certainly use a swimming pool at the community center, which I use. But across the street, we have a state-of-the-art facility with the high school. We need to coordinate with the high school. When I lived in Texas, that's what we did. The state-of-the-art facilities that they had there, they paid hundreds of millions of dollars for. At the end of the day, it became a public park. So we don't necessarily have to, we have to think outside of the box and just think outside of just spending some additional money and taxing people to death. Because primarily, when I go to Stratford Till, which we do, and buy prepared foods, chicken and stuff like that, I'm gonna be the one that's paying this 1% tax in addition to my real estate tax, and I believe that's gonna affect everyone else. So what I would ask, you all, in order for this to pass, you probably have to have 2 meetings for that to happen. We need to table some of this and not actually pass this tax, because I don't believe it's the right thing to do, and I believe that's one of the reasons we had the upheaval that we had in this previous election. I've only been here for 9 years, and I think in those 9 years, you all have never had contested races like we just had. And that's because people are tired of stuff like this.
Finish up, please, Eric.
Okay, so that's the thing that I wanted to share. Let's think outside the box.
Thank you.
Let's not just spend money.
Is there any other public comment this evening?
Brian Messarch, 201 East 68th Place. I'm here to speak out against this tax. I would like to echo the things that Mr. January has said. We are wasting money currently. We have are given 10-year tax abatements, which is just giving the farm away. In addition, almost all of those tax abatements are also inside of TIF zones, which have created slush funds, which redirects money away from where it should be going. As an example, the Redevelopment Commission gave the school system a $400,000 grant. If the TIF zone wasn't there, they would get property taxes off that. They wouldn't have to ask for a grant. So we're playing games with money. The amount of money that we're spending, we just gave away Andran's Alumni Association. Andran isn't really a Merrillville people, and they are people who can afford any place, plus Catholic churches have plenty of halls. We just gave them use of the community center for free. Why? While at the same time, communities in Merrillville, such as the Brookwood neighborhood, they're paying $100 to have a 2-hour meeting there. So why is it that non-Merrillville residents get to come use the facilities free, where our neighborhoods, that's, you want to give something away for free, give it to the neighborhoods, give it to the residents who are paying the taxes, who are footing the bill for that. Let them be there for, it's mind-boggling to me that we have to ask for. And you want to minimize the, oh, it's just a couple of pennies per. But if you actually want to get to your $1.8 million estimate, that's approximately $45 tax per year on every man, child, and woman who lives in Merrillville. Why don't we just have them cut a check for $45 for everybody in their household and call it a day? That's, people can't even afford, bills, let alone we're going to tack this on. And then it is not going to be something that is transient, where because people are not visiting Merrillville the way they used to. This is going to affect Merrillville residents the most. And it's going to affect the people who can't store food, who can't afford to stock up at Costco's and things like that. The people who go out 2 to 3 times a week to get a bite to eat, that's what they're going to pay for. And it's at the gas station for the taquitos, it's at Strax for deep fried fish, or Strax is an awesome roasted chicken, and things like that. But we're trying to minimize it, like this is going to be paid by, people from somewhere else, and it's not. It's going to affect Merrillville. and we're not spending our money wisely as it is. This should be a no, absolutely no.
Is there any other public comment this evening? Mr. Griffin, would you mind addressing for the audience where the tax money comes from to fund the Community School Corporation? I don't believe it comes from TIF districts or town taxes in any way.
Mr. President, thank you. Members of the council, Madam Clerk Treasurer Pro Tempore. Presently, as part of then Governor Daniels' effort to try to reform property taxes and minimize their impact, a policy decision was made to minimize the property taxes that school corporations can impose, which gave the state a great deal of authority over the operating budgets of schools. At one time, the average percentage that schools cost, Merrillville was always going to be different because so much more of your tax base, they have a tax base that's way outside of, we're about, the civil tax base of Merrillville is roughly 68% of the total tax base that Merrillville's community schools take in. It's much bigger. But in order to do that, they get to decide how much they can distribute. So it put more controls placed on the state when the whole point of having local school boards was that local control. They are allowed to have 2 levies that are operating. And to the comment that was made by Mr. Messarch, it is true that prior to 2019, there could be an argument made, even though I think that the economic development tool of allocation areas is supposed to be done to bring as an incentive for something to happen that otherwise wouldn't happen. It seems metaphysical to me at times to argue against that possibility of it saying that I'm upset at a tool that brought something that I would like to be able to tax. It wouldn't be here if we didn't have that tool to bring them. But let's assume that that's a looser standard than any of us think. Prior to 2019, school systems had 2 taxes that were called flat rate taxes. So the way to think of it is if I'm allowed to put 5 cents on every $100 of assessed valuation, it may grow. If I deny that coming on right away, an argument can be made, an immeasurable one, about how much money is not being collected by the schools in consequence of this choice. However, since 2019, they have all floating levies, and the rates are sort of an output. They get set after the tax order comes in. They get to control the growth of their levies, the few that they have, plus they're larger. I think it's called the operating fund. There's an education fund as well that the school contributes to. So in some respects, Merrillville is trying to be a good neighbor to them, and it had nothing to do with us denying them access to funds. Since 2019, any allocation area we had has not impaired them. They don't have any impact one way or another with regard to their ability to raise money. The contribution, though, is about encouragements that we've had increasingly put in the statute that authorizes them to encourage civil governments to be good neighbors to the public schools. So there's been a couple of initiatives to change the language that authorizes those funds where they used to be not authorized for any of those uses. They've been expanded a little bit in order to allow the council to be a good neighbor to not only the children of Merrillville who go to those schools, but all the people that go to Merrillville schools, which is still a considerable corporate entity, albeit public, in the place of Merrillville. So in terms of how the allocation area gets money raised and how schools get their money raised, the impact from allocation area since 2019 is no longer an issue for the property tax funded funds that they have, which have been sorely reduced. And it makes no difference to the legislature when it does its formula for what became their largest form of property tax reform to essentially send the operating revenues up for schools to operate. Is that what you were referring to, Mr. President?
Yes, thank you, Michael, for the
You're welcome.
clarification.
Mr. President, if I could,
Credit.
as the RDC president, I probably have to make a couple different statements here for the benefit of Mr. January and for Brian. And Brian and I sat down when Pat was here with Sabine Miller and with Angie and went through exactly how these TIF works. And first and foremost, for the very last time, please, everyone understand, we made a switch as an RDC. That community center is not being paid for by the taxpayers of the town of Merrillville. It is being paid for by all the supposed bad big boxes that we approved, all the bad tax abatements that we've approved. Those guys are paying for that community center right now. All the allocation areas have been combined. Is that correct, Trista? Yes. Our 2 obligations are being paid for by Amazon, by Midwest Truck and Auto, by Domino's, all these big boxes that everybody thinks are so bad, they're the ones footing the bill. And please, for the last time, understand that. It is not on the taxpayers' back any longer. Our financial advisor took care of that, advised us that we could do it, and this council, this RDC, made that commitment. Secondly, as it relates to the school grant, they can come in, and Michael can concur with me and Trista, the schools are one of the 5 entities that have to sign off on an economic development plan for an allocation area or for a TIF. Merrillville Schools signed off on this years ago. Before I was a councilman, before anybody was here, actually Rick was here his first term of office back in '95 when they created the TIF districts. Those 5 taxing entities have to sign off and bless an economic development plan. The school corporation did that. However, in the state statute, and again, I turn to Michael or Joe, they can come back and ask for up to 15% of our annual draw every year in exchange for that approval. They came back, Rich, back in when Dr. Sperling was superintendent, they came with their first grant, which was for career counseling. And I believe at that time we gave them $325,000 a year for a 5-year period, which was from, I think it ended in 18, didn't it, Rich? Something like that. It was from 13 to 18.
In the agreement, I think.
Something like that. And so they came back and they asked us for this other one, which again was for I believe the truancy court, for the improvements to Filer, and for the CCE program.
Correct.
Again, they're entitled to ask for more than they asked for. We give them $400,000 plus. So just to clear the air, clarify things, you know, the Westlake corridor, I was the one that proposed that, Eric, quite honestly. And you know why? Because at the time, Congressman Bisklosky was pushing this heavily, and he had asked all the communities to participate. And does the train track go through here now? No, it does not. In phase 2, they will improve the Grand Trunk. And one of the ideas was that a train station would be on the Grand Trunk and Broadway eventually when phase 2 goes from the Westlake out to Valparaiso. So that's one reason we had proposed taking the allocation of the local option income tax and setting it aside. Now, granted, it's being set aside, and you're probably correct on the numbers, and I have to check with Michael, but if Westlake does not go through, the communities will get that money back, is my understanding. So, you know, a couple of things to consider with comments that are made about, you know, what we're doing with, you know, with the finances here. We've always gotten a good audit, Trista, from State Board of Accounts. Some of this stuff, you know, having served as long as I do, Mr. President, I kind of take personal that, you know, we're the fiscal officers, you know, for this community, and we want to make sure that the facts are out there, the correct facts are out there, that, you know, again, I go back to the community center. That's not being paid for by the taxpayers anymore. It was desperately needed in this community. Everybody thinks it's great, and I have all the faith and confidence in Mr. Price in running that center and through my committee with Jeff and Leonard. So those are my comments, Mr. President.
Thank you.
He's leaving, Mr. Price. So, and I know I've already made some comment, but I don't have a problem with big box businesses. My issue is the 10-year tax abatements. I've never said anything about Amazon or any of the businesses that are located here. My issue is we're giving them a 10-year tax abatement, and the major problem with that is it's discriminatory. Small businesses are not getting any tax breaks, and I don't believe that we should be giving people a 10-year tax break, maybe a 3-year tax break in order for them to get acclimated and get their operations up and going, but a 10-year, that's too long of a runway. Anything can happen. It's putting the town at risk. We're taking a business risk. So I don't have a problem with the big box. And in regards to the local option income tax, it's the rate that we gave. Nobody else outside of the towns that are benefiting from it decided to give as much as we did. We could have given like a third of what they asked for. That's what they were asking for, and we decided to give them 300% more than what they asked for. And the town is not in a position to afford that. And that's why I say my major concern is that we'll continue, once we get this 1% in, which is going to be about $1.8 million based off of the estimates. It could be more, it could be less, it's an estimate. What kind of budgetary controls are we going to have so that we're not just giving money away? We gave $2 million to the Boys and Girls Club, and that's not going to generate any tax dollars whatsoever. It's a not-for-profit organization. We're probably not going to tax them, but yet they are in a redevelopment economic area.
Eric, you're kind of repeating what you spoke about earlier.
I know, I'm just making it clear, because, I mean, me and Sean will have time to talk about this behind
Sure,
closed
exactly,
doors, and
sure.
hopefully we
Right.
can get it corrected. But my issue is, we have to have some sort of control before we just add more money to the problem, because money is not always the solution to a spending problem.
Thank you,
We
sir.
have to correct it.
Thank you.
Now here. We gotta close public comment.
Number one, schools are funded 85% through sales tax. The other 15% is business property tax. I don't care how you want to mumbo jumbo it. You can actually go over to the assessor's office and look, and you'll see the schools get money from property taxes. And when that property tax is reduced through a tax abatement, that means they're getting less money. That's how that math works. The TIF zones were not created until 1998. There was one TIF zone. It was for Meyer. All the additional TIF zones were created after that.
That's correct, Brian. Thank you.
My issue is this is, when we are spouting out information, let's spout out correct information, things that
Couldn't
are
agree more.
absolutely dead on.
Absolutely.
I don't like it when information is incorrect or misleading.
Right. Absolutely.
Mr. President, if I may have your leave?
Sure, go
Mr. Mesarch, actually, I agree with what you just said, and it doesn't contradict anything I said. I did say that the major amount of contribution for their operating comes from the state, which formerly was done by a property tax. They reformed that in 2019. Prior to that, the change in reliance on property taxes for schools was proposed by Governor Daniels. It's been in place for a while. And there was a second round of reforms that the legislature put, trying to make more clear that money would go to educational purposes. They have what used to be their transportation and capital projects funds that are called something else now that are property taxes. I wasn't telling you that's not true, but they're primarily not as affected because the way the property taxes are raised is levy controlled, which is really a matter of fractions. How much am I going to spend divided by the tax base producing a rate? Whereas prior to 2019, two of their funds had a rate that got applied to the AV if it grew or went down. That's when it was affected by it. That's a fact. So your closing remark about that we should be very careful about our facts, I share that goal with you, and I'm committed to trying to make sure my public remarks are words that I can eat if I have to eat later, as my mom would say, but also that I've been accurate with you. I care about that as a professional in public service and somebody who practiced for 30 years public finance. I thank the council for your permission to speak.
Thank you for the clarity.
My concern is the state shifted away in 1996.
So Brian, we can't,
To make things even,
Mr. Messarch, when you talk from the audience chairs, we're not going to be able to pick it up on the video, so please finish up, though. We're going to close public comment now.
the reform that you're talking about happened in 1996, where the state shifted away to sales tax to fund schools primarily in order to keep wealthy neighborhoods and wealthy municipalities from having an unfair advantage over disadvantaged communities. And then it was more refined in 2019, but it has been in place that way. And I don't mind your super detailed explanation because I can understand it. My concern is words for people who are everyday people. So layman's terms, I try to present my information in layman's terms so that people can consume it and like, oh, okay, get it. They don't have all the time to have all the extras.
Thank you. We'll close public.
Mr. President, before you close public comment,
Go ahead.
and you and I talked about this, and Joe, I don't know how to present this from the dais or up at the podium. As you all know, I'm your board representative to the Crossroads Regional Chamber of Commerce. Myself, I represent Merrillville. Andrew Karras represents the city of Crown Point. Marnita Taylor is on there as the Merrillville School Corporation. And the superintendent from Crown Point is also on there, along with several business leaders. We have a 21-member board. The last time food and beverage was presented, they submitted a letter of support. I abstained from the vote. They did and still do support the food and beverage tax for the town of Merrillville. Unfortunately, Deanne Patina, our president, and John Jordan, our chairman-elect, could not attend the meeting tonight. So I wanted to say that, Joe, for the record. I don't know, again, should I be doing it from the dais or the podium? I don't know.
Well, you can do it from the dais. The main thing is, at the end of the day, they provided a letter of support when we went downstate to get the tax.
Correct,
Support still continues to stand.
correct.
Mr. President.
Mr. White.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, because I'm trying to fully understand the 1% and what it's going to be used for. I think on many occasions I asked this council for assistance on the north end of Merrillville, and I never got it. I think on your end, and I'm not saying anything new, but you get those lights and those improvements and those sidewalks, and in your area too, Sean. You guys get that. Never got it down there, even though this council had approved of it. To when I say of it, for the decorative lights, because I talked about them all the time. The entrance of coming off the expressways. I've talked about that. So now the money was here for those things to happen for you guys, but now we got to use the 1% tax for it to happen in other parts of America. I don't think that's fair, to be honest with you. I think we should have had that during the same period of time that you were getting yours. I'm not against a 1% tax because I think in the end it probably will. I'm just saying that I would probably prefer a new council to look at this versus going out the back door right before that last moment. Then we run this thing, because most of you are going to be here next year anyway. So I was just saying that in terms of improvements on the north end of Merrillville, we didn't get that, but you did, Rick. You got 93rd Avenue and other things, and we didn't have that 1% tax. So I'm just saying, in terms of those dollars, where were those dollars at prior to this 1%, possible passage of this 1% food and beverage tax? That's where I'm at, because nothing moved. And I know we approved it, and actually I thanked the council at the time when we recommended it for 61st Avenue. You know where my mindset is on 61st Avenue. And we never, ever got it. Now, are you telling me now with this 1% tax that we will get it? I just want to know, because if we're getting it now, then I don't understand why we couldn't have got it before. And it's a little irritable, because I think things were held off.
Well, if it passes, that'll be for the new council to decide,
Yeah,
Mr. White.
but I get that.
If
But
it's a permitted use.
Sure, I get that part. But
Right.
but we talked about it, and it never the needle never moved. But you got your share of that, and I don't think that's fair.
There was different funding sources used for
Absolutely.
various projects
Sure.
in town.
So are those
It just didn't come out of the general fund.
So are those same funding sources available right now?
No.
That's what I'm saying. But
Right.
you were able to assess those fundings. Now we're asking the community and those people to pay the 1% tax to do something that you got done without the 1% tax. So I just been a little critical about it, Mr. President, because I think that's something we could have done initially. And I felt a little bit like you kind of held off on those improvements because you might have thought maybe it made me kind of look as a better councilman than, well, I'm already a great councilman.
Well, I don't agree with that statement, but
Well, I agree with
It's
my
your
own
statement.
statement,
it's your comment.
Absolutely. So I just think that in the terms of fairness, and then, Sean, you said some things before as to this trunk is going to run down here to Merrillville. I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but I just don't think it's going to happen, because I've never heard anybody say, hey, after we make this thing a joint thing, then we're going to go down to Merrillville and we're going to have a train station where they can do it here in Merrillville.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day,
That's in the plans and
It's
phases.
always
Part of-
been,
Always
part of
been part of the
their
plan.
long-range transportation plan, Leonard. I don't,
sure, and you might have seen those plans before I did. But at the same time, 5 miles down the road, you got the city of Gary that's also have that. So it just doesn't seem to be, for me to be cohesive in the terms of, as Mr. January was talking about that loaded tax there. And I don't think 22% was a good idea for us, to be honest with you. Specifically, some communities didn't even participate at all because they didn't want to put their taxpayers at that particular way to make Hammond and Dyer being more prosperous than Merrillville. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, moving on to the first reading, the introduction of the proposed ordinance number 23-32. And Angela, I'm sorry, but something of this importance, we're going to have to read it verbatim for the record. Thank you.
Take a breath.
Yeah.
Ordinance number 2333.
Not 32, I'm sorry.
Oh,
You do 32 first.
32.
32 first, yeah.
Ordinance number 2332, an ordinance of the Town of Merrillville, Lake County, Indiana, adopting the Town of Merrillville food and beverage tax. Whereas on or around May 4th, 2023, Governor Eric Holcomb signed PL 236, FKA HEA 1454, hereinafter referred to as the Act, which among others items amended IC 6-9 to IC 6-9-54.5 as a new chapter allowing the fiscal body of the Town of Merrillville, Lake County, Indiana, hereinafter referred to as the town, to impose an excess tax called the Merrillville Town Food and Beverage Tax, hereinafter referred to as food and beverage tax, by or before December 31st, 2023. Whereas, in accordance with the Act, the food and beverage tax applied to a transaction in which food and beverage is furnished, prepared, or served for consumption at a local or on equipment provided by a retail merchant, 2, in the town, and 3, by a retail merchant for consideration. Whereas, the food and beverage tax also apply to a transaction in which food or beverage is 1, served by a retail merchant off a merchant's premise, 2, food sold in a heated state or heated by a retail merchant, 3, made of 2 or more food ingredients, mixed or combined by a retail merchant for a sale as a single item, other than food that is only cut, repackaged, or pasteurized by the seller, and eggs, fish, meat, poultry, and food containing these raw animals' foods requiring cooking by the consumer as recommended by the Federal Food and Drug Administration in Chapter 3, Subpart 3-401.00 of its food code to prevent for food-borne illness or food sold with eating utensils provided by a retail merchant, including plates, knives, forks, spoons, glasses, cups, napkins, or straws. A plate does not include a container or package used to transport the food. Whereas, the food and beverage tax does not apply to the furnishing, prepared, or serving of a food or beverage that is exempt, or to the extent the transaction is exempt from the state gross retail tax imposed by IC 6-2.5. Whereas, the food and beverage tax rate may not exceed 1% of the gross retail income received by the merchant from a qualifying food or beverage transaction, and the gross retail income received by the retail merchant from a transaction does not include the amount of the tax imposed on the transaction under IC 6-2.5. Whereas, amounts received from the food and beverage tax shall be paid monthly by the treasurer of the state to the clerk treasurer upon warrant issued by the auditor of the state. Whereas, pursuant of the act, money in food and beverage tax receipts funds shall be used by the town for park and recreation purposes, including the purchase of land for the park and recreation purposes. 2, for tourism-related purpose or facilities, including the purchase of land for tourism-related purposes, and/or for the pledge of money under IC 5-1-14-4 for bonds, leases, and other obligations incurred for a purpose described in subdivision 1 and 2. Whereas, on December 20th, 2023, the Town Council for the Town of Merrillville, Lake County, Indiana, hereinafter referred to as the town, held a duly noted public hearing in which a discussion of the purpose ordinance to impose the food and beverage tax was only substantive issued on the agenda for the public hearing. And whereas the Town Council now desires to adopt the food and beverage tax as further described herein. Now, therefore, be it ordained by the Town Council of the Town of Merrillville, Lake County, Indiana, meeting in regular sessions as follows. Section 1, adoption. The Town Council hereby adopts a food and beverage tax at 1% of the gross retail income received by the merchant from qualifying food and beverage transactions. Section 2, taxable transaction pursuant to IC 6-9-54.5-4A. The food and beverage tax shall apply to a transaction in which food and beverage is furnished, prepared, or served. 1, for consumption at a local or on equipment provided by a retail merchant. 2, in the town. And 3, by a retail merchant for consideration. Transaction described in subsection A1 include transactions in which food or beverage is 1, served by the retail merchant off the merchant premises. 2, food sold in a heated state or heated by a retail merchant. 3, made of 2 or more food ingredients, mixed or combined by a retail merchant for sale as a single item, other than food that is cut, repackaged, or pasteurized by the seller, and eggs, fish, poultry, and food containing these raw animals, food requiring cooking by the consumer as recommended by the Federal Food and Drug Administration. In Chapter 3, Subpart 3-401.11 of its Food Code, so as to prevent foodborne illness, or 4, food sold with eating utensils provided by a retail merchant, including plates, knives, forks, spoons, glasses, cups, napkins, or straw for a purpose of subdivision. A plate does not include a container or package use of transport the food. The food and beverage tax does not apply to furnishing, preparing, or serving of the food or beverage in a transaction that is exempt, or to the extent the transaction is exempt from the state gross retail tax imposed by IC 6-2.5. Section 3, food and beverage tax receipt fund. The Town Council hereby instructs the Clerk Treasurer to establish a food and beverage tax receipt fund. The Clerk Treasurer shall deposit in this fund all amounts received by the imposition of the food and beverage tax money earned from the investment of money in the fund becomes a part of the fund. Section 4, distribution and collection of tax revenue. The food and beverage tax shall be imposed, paid, and collected in the same manner that the state gross retail tax is imposed, paid, or collected under IC 6-2.5. The amount received from the imposition of the food and beverage tax shall be paid monthly by the treasurer of the state to the clerk treasurer upon warrants issued by the auditor of the state. Section 5, use of tax revenue. Money in the food and beverage tax receipts funds shall be used by the town for parks and recreation purposes, including a purchase of land for parks and recreation purposes. 2, the tourism-related purposes or facilities, including the purchase of land for tourist-related purposes and/or for the pledge of money under IC 5-1-14-4 for bonds, leases, or other obligation incurred for a purpose described in subdivision 1 and 2. Revenue derived from the imposition of the food and beverage tax may be treated by the town as additional revenue for the purpose of fixing its budget for the budget year during which the revenues are to be distributed to the town. Section 6, covenant. With respect to obligations for which a pledge has been made under IC 6-9-54.5-9, the General Assembly convenes with the holders of the obligation for IC 6-9-54.51 will not be repealed or amended in a manner that will adversely affect the imposition of collection of the food and beverage tax if the payment of any of the obligations is outstanding. Section 7, effective date of the tax. In accordance with IC 6-9-54.5-3C, the food and beverage tax shall apply to transactions that occurred after the last day of the month that succeed the month in which the ordinance is adopted. Pursuant to Acts IC 6-9-54.5 shall expire July 1st, 2045, but for town purposes, the 20-year period will begin January 1, 2024, and expire December 31st, 2044. Section and the authority to codify. That the town manager and the clerk treasurer are authorized and instructed to cause this ordinance to be properly incorporated into the Merrillville Municipal Code, assigning a chapter and a section as needed, notwithstanding the form. Section 9, instruction to certify. The town shall immediately send a certified copy of the ordinance to the Department of State Revenue. Section 10, effectiveness. This ordinance shall be of full force and effective from and upon its adoption and in accordance with Indiana law, all which is resolved this 20th day of December 2023 by the Town Council of the Town of Merrillville, Lake County, Indiana.
Thank you.
Whew.
Give her a couple minutes. I had to take a breath for you.
Is there a motion for this ordinance?
Motion to approve, Mr. President.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Pettit, second by Mr. Minchuk for approval of ordinance 23-32 on first reading. Open for discussion from the council.
Again, Mr. President, I want to go back to how I think it was unfair to my part of Merrillville for this to be held so long. This thing was approved in May of this year. That was plenty enough time for us to do something before today. And what I think it denied me, as a representative, it denied me what I think was appropriate to do for my community, because now the dollars are going to be there next year, but they were already here. If we would have did it like maybe in June or July, could have been the same thing. At least I could have said, well, hey, look, we were still moving forward with this. So I don't like that, but I know I had a vote for it. Thank you.
Is there any other comment from the council? Hearing none. Madam Clerk Treasurer, roll call, please.
Councilwoman Neal?
Yes.
Councilman Hardaway?
Yeah.
Councilman Minchuk?
Yes.
Councilwoman Uzelak?
Yes.
Councilman Pettit?
Yes.
Councilman White?
No.
President Bella?
Yes.
6 yeses, 1 no.
6-1, motion carries. Moving on tonight, and although it was mentioned in the ordinance, we do want to do a first reading of the ordinance 23-33. Mr. Griffin, give us a brief explanation of why we feel this is important to do as a companion.
Mr. President, members of the council, Madam Clerk Treasurer Pro Tempore, the enabling statute, which has been duplicated in your first reading of ordinance 2332, provides that the fiscal officer of the unit will create what is called the Food and Beverage Tax Receipts Fund. That's all that they're authorized to do, is so that they can instantly have an accounting entity into which to deposit the receipts that will start to come in if this is imposed. This is simply first reading. To have the companion ordinance is desirable because the council then can set out parameters and more clearly spell out guidance with regard to adhering to 5-13, which is the investment law of Indiana. Also, it establishes it as a fund that goes into your code, which I've been trying very hard for us to get more of the things in the code. It's our public laws. I want the public to be able to read about the laws of the community that they live in, and that's what's necessary as a vehicle to cause that. And it's considered best practice, Mr. President, members of the council, in terms of public administration of local government and in public finance.
Would you like Michael to read this one, Andy?
I'll be happy to.
Go ahead, Michael. Yeah. If you don't mind, Michael,
I don't mind a bit. Thank you.
give Angie a break.
With leave from the council, though, I think you did an outstanding job, Madam President, Clerk Treasurer Pro Tempore. The second ordinance for consideration of the council this evening for potential for first reading is ordinance number 2333, an ordinance of the town of Merrillville, Lake County, Indiana, establishing a food and beverage tax receipts fund. Whereas pursuant to Indiana Code 6-9-54.5, Section 3, and ordinance number 23-32, the Town Council of the Town of Merrillville, hereinafter referred to as the Town Council, adopted a 1% food and beverage tax applicable to certain food and beverage items within its boundaries, hereinafter referred to as the food and beverage tax. Whereas pursuant to IC 6-9-54.5-8, the town fiscal officer is required to establish a food and beverage tax receipts fund. Whereas the fund established herein shall be and entitled the Food and Beverage Tax Receipts Fund. Now therefore be it ordained by the Town Council of the Town of Merrillville, Indiana as follows. Section 1, the above recitals are incorporated by reference. Section 2, this ordinance shall be known as the Food and Beverage Tax Receipts Fund in the Code of Municipal Ordinances of the Town of Merrillville, Indiana, and be referenced as indicated. Section 3, the fund is established. The Town of Merrillville Food and Beverage Tax Receipts Fund is hereby established. Sources of funding. The Town of Merrillville shall deposit in the fund all food and beverage tax amounts received under IC 6-9-54.5 et sequitur. Money earned from the investment of money in the fund becomes a part of the fund. Section 5, uses of funding. The town shall use such revenues collected in the fund, if available, for the following purposes. And if I may add, Mr. President, members of the council, and Madam Clerk Treasurer Pro Tempore, and the people here who are watching, these are specified in the statute. We cannot go beyond these. But park and recreation purposes, including the purchase of land for park and recreation purposes, tourism-related purposes, or facilities including the purchase of land for tourism-related purposes, and the pledge of money under IC 5-1-14-4 for bonds, leases, and other obligations that are incurred for a purpose described under subdivisions 1 and 2, which means that are incurred for a purpose to support park and recreation purposes, including the purchase of land for park and recreation purposes, or tourism purposes, or facilities, including the purchase of land for tourism-related purposes. Section 6, amendments. This ordinance may be amended from time to time if additional guidance is received from any state agency. Section 7, Food and Beverage Tax Receipt Fund shall exist until terminated by ordinance of the Town Council. The fund shall be non-reverting. In the instance of the fund termination, the fund balance shall be transferred in the Town of Merrillville General Fund, and after all outstanding debt obligations from the fund have been satisfied. Section 8, prior ordinance. All ordinances and or parts of ordinances in conflict herewith, are hereby repealed. Section 9, severability. If any section, subsection, sentence, clause, phrase, or portion of this ordinance shall for any reason be held invalid or unconstitutional by any court of competent jurisdiction, such portion shall be deemed a separate, distinct, and independent provision, and as such, holding shall not affect the validity of the remaining portions hereunder. Section 10, authority to codify. that the town manager and the clerk treasurer are hereby authorized and instructed to cause the ordinance to be properly incorporated into the Merrillville Municipal Code, assigning the chapter and section as needed, notwithstanding the form. Again, the effective date, section 11, this ordinance shall be in full force and effect from and after notice passage by the town council and all in the manner as provided by law. And again, the jurat begins, all of which is resolved this blank day of 2023. Mr. President, members of the council, Madam Clerk Treasurer Pro Tempore, that concludes the reading of proposed ordinance 2333.
Motion to approve, Mr. President.
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Pettit, second by Mr. Minchuk for approval of ordinance 23-33, ordinance of the town of Merrillville, Lake County, Indiana, establishing a food and beverage tax receipts fund. Open for discussion. Mr. White, you can see that some of the uses are very limited here, and if this was done 6 months ago or 4 months ago or yesterday, it really wouldn't have changed what we could do in neighborhoods and some of the streets unless it qualified with this very strict explanation of uses. So,
Yeah, I was just, reading that. I just thought when I looked at the date on there, I thought maybe that it should have been able to move forward in some sense. I mean, we could have borrowed some money maybe from the RDC president here until we got our money in the bank there. And that's my contention. Additionally, Mr. President, I know that that we all have to operate according to ordinances. And I do know our ordinances and our bylaws state certain ways that we have to vote on certain issues. And I think that I don't want to get us in trouble here by the way that we're voting, because I understand that when I read the bylaws or that ordinance, it specifically said that if when you vote, you have to say aye.
Can I interject on this one?
No, I'm talking to Mr.
Okay,
President.
after you're
Yeah,
finished.
Okay. No, I know you're going to go because I know you guys went to court, but
I know there's a court ruling on it.
Yes.
yeah, that was cleared up, Leonard.
Yes.
A
But
yes
it's-
is an affirmative vote, just like an aye.
but it's not in our bylaws, though.
Well, it's in Robert's rules, so.
They referred to the bylaws in the court argument, and the judge nullified their argument.
Yeah,
Okay, for the courts,
Wait a
for that court situation, they nullified that, but in the terms of our bylaws still say that, am I right? Until we change that, or unless I can see the court order, I've heard about it, and I'm not disputing what you're saying,
I
but,
think would be challenged in any way.
oh, I'm sure you will be, because when you break the law, you break the law. That's just like, say for
Well,
instance,
it's not breaking a law, it's just,
say for instance, anybody out there, they got an ordinance and stuff that they violate, then we're gonna bring them in here and we're gonna slap their hand or do whatever, because that's the ordinance. So, I just think from that perspective, maybe we need to change our ordinance then, or you guys need to change it next time. Mike, I think you had talked about maybe the council will change that where it really reflects what the judge said, Counselor, but go ahead, sir.
No, this issue was argued in court. It was fully briefed, and it was argued before a court of law.
Sure.
The court of law came back and said whether you say aye, whether you say a, it's semantics. So at the end of the day, as long as you affirm something or vote for it in the positive or the negative,
Sure.
that's what matters.
Absolutely,
That was the finding of the court.
sure. And also, that's being appealed, correct?
Not that issue.
What issue? I thought the issue.
The issue was the ordinance and the either substantive or non-substantive changes to the ordinance. Let me just add in this situation we're going through with the courts.
Sure.
On every level, we've won. On every level, the town has won. So that's all I'm going to say to that. But at the end of the day, with this issue, the ayes, the ayes, the nays, judge said it's all semantics. If you vote in the affirmative, it's one way. If you vote negative, it's another way. That's it.
I appreciate you saying that, but that's not what the bylaws read. And if we're not going by any of our bylaws, then.
Call for the vote. We're getting off topic.
Point of order, Mr. President. I had the floor. And I'm not getting off the topic. I just wanted to make sure that what we're doing is appropriate. I don't want to come back and says, say for instance, I've read Robert Rules of Order, and it never said what that judge said in terms of semantics. So that's my position. Thank you.
thank you, Mr. White. Any other comments from the council?
aren't we supposed to have public comment on this particular ordinance?
This is a first reading ordinance, and we don't have public comment on first reading ordinances. Mr. January, we do those on second reading. So on the 26th, if this passes, you'll have an opportunity to speak then.
Already did.
We already had a public hearing and we closed
We
it.
had a public hearing for this entire matter.
We just passed it. I didn't see anything about the fund anyway.
We had the public hearing concerning all ordinances that were before the town tonight.
No, we didn't have a public hearing on this. This was just published in the newspaper about 14 days ago. I was at the last meeting. We did not have a public hearing.
We just had a public hearing here tonight on this.
It's not even on the agenda. It's not even on the agenda.
Sure it is, yeah.
Yes, it is.
It's on there. It's on the backside.
Back,
Are you talking about today's agenda?
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, today's agenda, I'm talking about having a public hearing prior to this. This is what you, I believe that's what you're alluding to. And we had a public hearing.
We had the public hearing. Now we're having a formal first reading of both ordinances.
Okay.
We're allowed to do that under Indiana law.
Oh, yeah, I'm not questioning that aspect, but I didn't think that we had well, we still have to have a second reading in order for it to become enforced, correct?
Correct. A public hearing has been entertained and has been closed.
Right, so with the second reading, in order to go to the second reading, you gotta have 100% of all of you all voting for the second reading, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
I don't think there's any anticipation on doing a second reading tonight on
Tonight.
either one of these ordinances.
Okay, all right, good, so we have to talk about this at the next town hall meeting.
It will be considered at the next town council meeting.
Madam Clerk Treasurer, call the roll, please.
Councilwoman Neal? Yes. Councilman Hardaway?
Aye.
Councilman Minchuk?
Aye, yes, or whatever it takes.
Councilwoman Uzelak?
Yes.
Councilman Pettit?
Yes.
Councilman White?
No.
President Bella?
Aye.
Six affirm.
6 affirmed and 1 no. The motion carries.
Motion to adjourn, Mr. President.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Maybe.
Hey.